Gidon sort of advocates on behalf of Klal Yisrael, because when the Malach Hashem said to him, that everything is going well, right? He said, Hashem imcha gibor achayil. He says, well, if Hashem is with us, why is everything going so bad? And I remember it happened, the previous night was the Seder Pesach, and he said, where are all the miflaos and the miracles that you provided for Klal Yisrael? We need them now. So Hashem says, fine, I'm going to be with you and I'm going to send you to strike Midian. So that's where we left off. Vayi balaylahu, vayomer lo Hashem, kach et par ashor asher lavicha. Take the ox or the bull that belongs to your father, ufar hasheni shavashoni, and the second bull that's called the 7-year bull. Veharasta es mizbach habal asher lavicha. So if you remember, the Baal was the avodah zarah that most of the Canaanites worshipped, and many Israelites also worshipped the Baal. And Yoash, the father of Gidon, apparently people kept Yiddishkeit, but they also worshipped the Baal. And vet Asherah asher alav tichrot. The Asherah was an avodah zarah, which was a tree. And so Gidon is commanded by Hashem, destroy the Mizbeach of Baal and destroy the Asherah tree. So what is this? What are these two bulls? So there were bulls that were fattened for 7 years for avodah zarah, and so this was a bull that was designated for avodah zarah, and it may also have been worshipped for avodah zarah. And the Gemara in Tmura, Daf Chav Hey, brings us pasuk. Shmona dvarim hitiru ba'oso laila. That night, Gidon, who was told eventually he's gonna build him his mizbeach and he's gonna offer these bulls on a mizbeach that he builds after he destroys the mizbeach of Baal. Well, so the Gemara says Shmona dvarim hitiru ba'oso laila. Chutz. So there is a law of shchutei chutz. You're not allowed to shech the korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Now you could say, well, what about a private bama? People could build an altar in their backyard, but that only was permitted in the 14 years prior to the erection of the Mishkan in Shiloh. For 369 years, the Mishkan stood in Shiloh, and you could not offer a korban in your private backyard bama. After the Mishkan in Shiloh is destroyed, during the time of Eli HaKohen, there's going to be 57 years when the Mizbeach is in the city of Nov, Ir HaKohanim, for 13 years until Shaul HaMelech destroys it. And then 44 years in the city of Givon, Nov Givon. That's 57 years. If you add up 14 in Gilgal, 369, and that it was in Shiloh, and 57 is 440. And eventually that's the period of time, because 480 years after they left Mitzrayim, Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash Rishon. So the math works out. So in the period of time that the Mishkan is standing in Shiloh, you're not allowed to offer a korban in the boma. So that's chutz. So one of the heterim is that Gidon could offer this korban even though you're violating the law of shchutei chutz. That's number one. Number two, Lila. He's told to offer this korban at night. Korbanos are not offered at night. Number two, Zarus. Gidon is not a Kohen. Normally a Kohen has to do the avoda. Ukli shares. There's no kalim. Normally when you shech the animal, you have to receive the blood in a kli. He has no klei shares. Number next, klei asherah. He used the vessels that were used to worship the Asherah tree instead of the kli shares. Well, any kli that is used in the performance of Avodah Zarah is osir b'hana. Can't use it, and certainly it's osir to be involved in korbanos. Number two, atzei Asherah. They burnt it with the wood of the Asherah tree, which of course is not permitted. Then umuktzah. A muktzah means it's an animal designated to be an avodah zarah animal, and especially that's why the Meforshim say it was the 7-year bull. And v'nevad, and you're also an animal that was worshipped. You can't offer as a korban either. So the Gemara actually notes that there were 4 leniencies at Terim given to Gidon this night. Pasuk Chavav uvanita mizbech l'Hashem lokecha. After you destroy the Asherah and the Baal, the Mizbech LaBaal, you shall build the Mizbech to Hashem. Arosha ma'oz hazeba marocha. In a place that's arranged for this. V'lakachta es parasheni, take this bull, v'alita olah b'atzei asher shetichrot, and bring it up as an olah using the atzei asherah that you're going to cut down. Vayikach Gidon asara anashim me'avadav. Apparently, the family was wealthy enough that they had a lot of servants. So these were his servants. He came from a distinguished family. Vayaz kasher diber elav Hashem, vayi kasher yareh et beit aviv, bet anshei ha'ir me'asot yomam vayas laila. Now, not just Yoash, but the whole city worshiped Baal. So Gidon is a little afraid. He's afraid of the house of his father and of the people of the city to do it in broad daylight, so he did it at night. Again, we see this. Remember last week we talked about that the Shoftim, as we get further on into the Sefer Shoftim, they're not as spiritually exalted as Otniel ben Knaz or Ehud ben Gera or Dvorah. There we didn't see any questioning. We just said, because the Yoash, both the pasuk says that he was afraid of both his Beis Aviv, because his father worshipped it, and the people of the city he was afraid of both of them. So what was I saying? What was I saying? I was saying about?
You were saying that they did.
Oh yeah. So you see, Gidon he's not doing it in broad daylight. He's doing it at night,
Right.
Because he's worried. Remember, he needed all sorts of coaxing to go ahead with this. Then vayashkimu anshei ha'ir babokir. The people of the town wake up. V'nenu tatz mizbach haBaal. They find the altar of Baal has been destroyed. The Asherah asher alav korta, and the Asherah is destroyed. V'tapar sheni ha'ulam mizbach habanu, and they see that someone has offered this cow that they were waiting 7 years to fatten to offer to the Baal. No, it's been offered on a mizbech to Hashem. Vayomru ishel re'eyu mi asa davar hazeh. They said to each other, who did this? Vayidrishu vayvakshu. They did an investigation. Vayomru Gidon ben Yoash asa davar hazeh. It apparently wasn't that difficult to find out that it was Gidon who did it. Vayomru anshei ha'ir el Yoash. So the people say to Gidon's father, Hotzei et bincha vayamod, give us your son, we will kill him. Kinatatzes mizbach habal, because he destroyed the Baal altar, and also destroyed the Asherah tree. Vayomer Yoash l'chol asher amdu alav. Yoash deflected them by saying, "Ha'atem trivun laBaal? What, you have to fight for Baal? Im atem toshin oto asher yarivlo yumad ad haboker." Whoever's going to sort of take the place of Baal, who's going to fight for Baal, he himself should be killed. Im Elohimu yarevlo, if he is powerful, he will fight himself. Kinatatit mizbecho. So Yoash was smart. He was able to save his son by arguing on this, in this way. That Baal doesn't need anybody to fight for him. And apparently the men of the city accepted this argument. The Steinsaltz says, as they did not worship the Baal zealously or out of deep faith, they worshiped the Baal only because it was the local fashion and because they mimicked the way of the surrounding nations. But it's not like they were going to, go nuts about it. So they accepted the deflection of Yoash. However, Gidon now gets a new name. Vaikralo bayamahu Yerubal lemor. Yarev bo abal. That became another name for him. Let the Baal fight against he who smashed his altar. Kinatatis mizbecho. So Gidon is now known as Yerubal. And Shmuel Hanavi, later on, when we learn, God willing, in Shmuel, he's going to refer to Gidon as Yerubal. He's now referred to in many times as Yerubal. Pasuk Lamed Gimel. So Midian and Amalek and the people from the east have now gathered. Vayavru, they crossed the Jordan. Vayachanu be'emek Israel, and they gathered in Emek Israel. Emek Israel, for those of you who know, is near Kibbutz Shluchot, Kibbutz Tirat Tzvi. It's at the foot of Baalei Gilboa. It's not far. Beit Sha'an opens up into Emek Israel. So it's, in the Galil area. And it's a large area for military encampment. We're going to see in Perek Chet that there's over 130,000 soldiers gathered for Midian and Amalek. V'ruach Hashem lavshat Gidon. So the spirit of Hashem goes into Gidon. He felt that the Spirit of God was upon him, and he had the strength to fulfill the command that was given to him by the Malach, and now he felt confident he could save Israel in the war against Midian. So, Vayitkah b'shofar, Vayizaek Aviezer acharav. The family of Aviezer came to him. That's another, the Aviezri, remember, he was one of the families of Menashe. The Aviezri family joined Gidon. Umalachim shalach b'chol Menashe. He sent messengers to the rest of the Shevet. Vayizaek amu acharav. And other members of the tribe of Menashe came and joined him. Then umalachim shalach ba'asher uvizvulun uv'naftali. These tribes were also nearby. So he sent messengers to them. Vayalu likratam. And they came to him as well.
Would these be the Chatzi Menashe that were on Ever Hayarden?
Yes. Remember, Chatzi Menashe lived to the west of the Jordan, and Chatzi Menashe lived to the east of the Jordan, and they were contiguous. They were contiguous with each other, except for the Jordan. Vayomer Gidon el Elohim. Gidon is looking for another sign that Hashem is going to be with them. I'm going to take a piece of wool, and I'm going to put it on the floor of the threshing house. ve'al kol haaretz chorev. If the dew is going to be on this piece of wool, and the rest of the ground is going to be dry, the yodati ki toshia bi'adi et Yisrael kasher dibarta. This will be a sign that you are going to help Klal Yisrael. Now,
Where do you come up with this test from?
so first of all, I just want to read Rashi. Let's go to the next pasuk. This was the sign. Vayichein, vayashkemi macharat, the morning, vayazarta giza. They squeezed out this cloth, meloa seifel mayim. Now you notice it doesn't say anything that the ground was dry. So look at Rashi. Vayichein, shayal tala giza levada yoter mi b'shar mekomot. The dew fell everywhere else, but it was more noticeable on the fleece. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a covenant previously that there will never be lack of dew. So that's what Rashi points out, that he made it so that it wasn't dry on the ground, but that the fleece had more dew than it should have. Vayomer Gidon el Elohim, al yikar apcha bi, va'adabra achapam. Don't be angry. I'm going to ask again. Anasena rakapam bagiza. Now I'm going to switch it. Yina chorev la giza levada. Let this wool be dry. Va'kol haaretz yetal. That means if you put a piece of wool down where everything gets dewy and it stays dry and everything else is wet, so that's even a bigger miracle. And this way, this Hashem could do, because the bris krus al tal would still, the covenant that Hashem would not stop the tal, basically would still be kept. Vayas Elokim came balayla hu, vayichar v'lagiza levada v'kol haaretz hayatal. Okay, that's the test.
Hashem passed the test.
Now, some learn that this little, again, Gidon was wondering, who am I to go and be the Moshiach of Yisrael? So that's this concept of this little piece of wool. That the little piece of wool, compared to everybody else, so it's sort of a mashal and nimshal for Gidon himself.
Do we have other examples of testing HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
Well, how about Moshe Rabbeinu?
Yeah, okay, that's one.
And not only that, what about the other part of the story of Gidon that seems reminiscent to us is Avram Avinu, right? Avram's father Terach. Avram goes and destroys the idols of his father. It's a similar sort of foreshadowing of events in a way, right? And some of the Meforshim comment on that. Okay, let me see if I want to say anything else about anything here. So, and also, why the double miracle? So the Malbim says, number one, Sheoshia ta'am biado, that Gidon himself is going to be the one that leads them, and then Sheoshiem biado levado below Amrav. We're going to see there was a miracle within a miracle, that not only was Gidon chosen, but then to fight this huge battle, there was only going to be a few soldiers, as we're going to see soon. So that's sort of the double sign that Gidon asks for here. Let's go into the Battle of Midian. Let's go into what happened here. Vayashkem Yerubal hu Gidon, right? He's reminding us. It's Yerubal, but that's Gidon. V'cholam asher ito. Vayachanu al Ein Charod. Ein Charod is at the spring of the foot of Har Gilboa. along the ancient road that ran from Gaza to Damascus through Beit Sha'an. The spring is called Ein Jalut in Arabic. So we know a lot of people who live in Ma'ale Gilboa, Lenny Kaplan, Ellen Mervis, Jerry Ganger. There was a Garin from Los Angeles that helped establish that kibbutz.
Mhm.
And so that's right there is where we're talking about. Umachane Midyan hayalo mitzafon. The Midian were in the north. Megivat HaMoreh ba'emek. And Vayomer Hashem el Gidon, Rava Am Asher Itach mititiet Midyan biadam. You have too many people. For me, when I now have you go and fight with Midian, I want the nace to be very apparent. They don't want Klal Yisrael, Hashem doesn't want Klal Yisrael to say, Kochi v'otzim yadi asali et hachayil hazeh. That we'll see how many people there were here shortly. There were like 22,000. We'll see in a minute how many people there were. But Hashem is going to say, you need much less. Ve'ata kranabos ne'am le'mor. Tell the people, mi yareh v'chared, whoever's afraid, yashov yitzpor mahar Gilad. Anyone who's afraid or anxious, let him return early in the morning through the highlands of Gilad. Excuse me. So they start up with 32,000, 22,000 left, and 10,000 stayed. Vayomer Hashem al Gidon, Oda Amrav, still too many people. So 10,000 is too many people. What does he do? Hashem tells them, Horedo tam elamayim, ve'atzrefenu l'chasham. Take them down to the spring of Ein Charod, and I'm going to choose, the word etzrefenu comes from like separating the impurity in gold from gold. So I'm going to take the dross out of the gold. That's Rafenel Chasham. Vaya. Now, what was the test? Asher Omer elecha ze yelech itach, hu yelech itach. I'm going to give you a test soon. And whoever I say for you to take. V'chol asher Omer elecha ze lo yelech imach, hu lo yelech. And those I say to you don't take, he should not go with you. Vayored etayim elamayim. Vayomer Hashem el Gidon, kol asher yalok bilshono min hamayim, kasher yalok hakelev, tatzigo tolavad. So whoever stands up and scoops the water up with his hand and licks like a dog from his hand, but doesn't get down on his knees and put his face there, right? V'chol asher yichral b'kav lishtot. Those that did not go down to their knees, but rather brought the water up to their lips were 300 men. The remainder, the 9,700, went on their knees and put their face down to drink the water. I'm going to save Klal Yisrael with the 300 liquors. And everyone else should go home. Now, Rashi. Ein zedech kriya kilo keklo shono. Kihem lo yalchu im hashekachem limudim lichro lifnei avodah zara. Rashi learns that people went down on their knees usually to worship avodah zara. So this was a siman that these people were worshiping the Baal. So they were sent home. And as we know, it's in general minhag Yisrael. We in general do not go on our knees. We do occasionally on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but very rarely. So that remains a minhag in Klal Yisrael. I'm just going to read the Steinsaltz. The commentaries seek to explain the logic behind this. Some maintain that the men who kneeled were evidently accustomed to kneeling before Baal. That's the Yalkut Shimoni and Rashi. Indeed, the notion that kneeling is not a Jewish mode of conduct has persisted throughout history. Others suggest that although kneeling is the most effective and natural way to drink, one who acts in this manner exposes himself to danger, since when his head is down in the river, it is difficult for him to rise and react quickly to sudden danger. By contrast, those who lapped the water while upright demonstrated their constant alertness. They were ready to respond to a call to battle even while they were drinking. That's a clear indication that they were better qualified to do battle with the Midianites. Despite any fears, their vigilance while drinking water indicates that they have experience with stressful and dangerous conditions and are therefore better suited to withstand the rigors of battle. That's how the Ralbag learns. Okay. Now, however, the 300 men took provisions from the people who were leaving and the et shofroteim, their shofars. That kolish Yisrael shilach ish la'o alav. Everyone else was sent back home. Uvishlosh ma'at ish achzik. He stayed with the 300. Umachne Midian hayalo mitachat be'emek. And Midian is in front of him in the valley. And without wasting time, vayiba laylahu, vayomer elav Hashem kumreid b'machaneh, kinesativ biyadecha. Hashem says, go down to their camp, and I'm going to give them to you. V'im yareya talaredet. Maybe you're fearful. Reidata ufura narchala machaneh. You and Fura, your associate, your counterpart, your assistant, you go down and sneak into their camp. V'shamata ma'ida beiru. Go listen what they're talking about. V'achar techazken yadecha. This will strengthen your hand. V'yaradata b'machaneh. And then you will go down into their camp and destroy them. So Gidon vayered hu ufuran aro. So Gidon listens and he goes down with Pura el ktseh chamushim asher b'machaneh until the guards. Or the chamushim means they're armed. Notwithstanding the Midianite sense of security, their camp was guarded by armed men. However, both in terms of number and in terms of deployment, the defense was inadequate, says the Meforshim. They're all in the camp, like locusts. Like I said, there's 130,000 of them. There's no count to their camels. And now he's by himself. Fura doesn't go with him into the camp. He overhears someone telling over a dream to his friend. Vayomer, hine chalom chalamti, v'nei tzlil, a loaf, lechem so'orim etapech b'machane Midyan. There's a small barley loaf that's tumbling through our camp. Vayavo ara oel, it actually reaches a tent. Vayakeu vayupol vayachelu malav nafala oel. And this little loaf hits one of the tents. It overturns the tent, and the tent falls. That's the dream that Gidon overhears one of the Midianites telling to his friend. So the friend answers, Vayan re'eh vayomer ein zot. Bilti im cherev Gidon ben Yoash ish Yisrael. The Midianites knew what was going on. They knew that the 32,000 sold. They didn't know that they sent home the 32,000, but they knew they had heard of Gidon, and they knew that they were coming to do battle with them. So he said, this is the sword of Gidon. Natan Elokim biado et Midian v'kol ha'machaneh. It's a symbol. This is Gidon overhearing one of the Midianites telling over to his friend who had heard the dream, sort of interpreting the dream to say that the dream, this little barley loaf that knocked down one of our tents that you saw in your dream must be talking about Yoshua. They're talking about Gidon. Now, says Rashi, who's chuta omer hakarev bepesach. Remember, we talked about that this whole episode is occurring Chag Pesach. Remember, Gidon tells the Malach Hashem that we had the Seder last night. So this is the time of the Omer. And the Omer is a schus for them. Says the Vayikra Rabbah. And Vayavo Gidon v'nei ish misaper l're'eyu about this lechem sa'orim. Amr Yishu ben Levi mitzvah sa'omer amda lahem b'mei Gidon. The mitzvah sa'omer protected Klal Yisrael at the time of Gidon. Shenamar Vayavo Gidon v'nei ish misaper l're'eyu chalom v'nei tzlil lechem sa'orim. Ma'ut tzlil rabbanon amrim al shatzol lahem oso ador min hatzadikim. U'v'schut mad nitzolu b'schut tzlil sa'orim ve'ezeh zu mitzvah sa'omer. So it's the mitzvah sa'omer that on the second day of Pesach, Klal Yisrael is commanded to offer a mincha. The mincha is a flour offering. Now, most flour offerings are made out of wheat. The only flour offering made out of barley is the mincha sa'omer and the mincha sota. So what's going on? Why are these korban? So barley is animal food. Wheat is human food. So number one, we start Pesach, the second day of Pesach, we offer mincha sa'omer, because you know what? We need 49 days to count until we get to Matan Torah. When we finally reach Matan Torah, we've reached the Madrega by refining our midos, because each of the days of the 49, chesed shebechesed, chesed shebegvura. If you look at each day, it's one of the 7 midos: chesed, gvura, netzach, hod. So it talks about refining our midos until finally on Shavuos we offer the shtei alechem, which is the mincha made out of wheat, because now we are now human beings in a sense. What was that? Now, why is the other mincha that's made out of barley the mincha sota? The sota was the husband suspected his wife of infidelity. He warned her not to sequester herself in a room with such and such person. That warning is done in front of 2 Eidim. Finally, 2 Eidim testified that they saw the woman and that such and such person in a room. They don't know what went on in that room, but that is the requirement. Now the husband at that point cannot live with his wife. He has to take her up to the Beis HaMikdash, and then they go through the Korban Mincha Sota. And why is it barley? Because she might have done an animalistic act, so therefore you bring a Korban made out of animal food. So that just explains about the omer. Now, what is the connection? My taschus koyach gedola shel mitzvah sa'omer ad shehitzilas ador shel Gidon. Afshlayu azbo kiei mispar muad shel anoshim ksherim. In fact, how did the mitzvah sa'omer succeed? There were only 300 people that did not go down on their knees, which implied everybody else were worshiping Avodah Zarah. So how did the mitzvah sa'omer lead to salvation? I'm reading the Musar Nevi'im. He brings from what we learn in Masechta Brachos. Omer malach asher v'nei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says asher lo yisa panim v'lo yikach shochad. God doesn't accept bribes. Because of echad omer yisa Hashem panecha elecha, which is the Birchas Kohanim. In one place it says lo yisa panim, and here he says I will turn my face towards them. Omer v'chilo esa panim liyisrael shekasaf lam b'Torah. How can I not turn my face to the Jewish people, where it says that when they eat, they shall bench, They medagdikim alatzman levarech ad kazayis v'ad kebeitza. And they're so careful with the shear, ad kazayis ad kebeitza. V'nei hakavana b'tshuva makom nirelo narkein. Ki anyan shel nesias panim hu shakadosh baruch hu mistapik b'muad b'masim tovim shenei Yisrael osim. Kadosh Baruch Hu is happy. Yisa panim means even if you do only a few good things, Hashem is happy with it. Just like we are careful in certain things, He's careful with us as well. Kadosh Baruch has to give us our parnasa. But maybe He doesn't give us a full share of our parnasa. We still thank Hashem by benching. Even if they're not fully full, even they only ate a kazayas or kabetza, they still bench. So therefore, the Minchas Omer represents that. For Hodola Malcolm ala Sa'orim that are in the field. So the same concept that even though it's only a few people that are doing the good things, Hashem is no seponim to us to help us.
Can I ask probably a very naive question, because girls don't learn much about karbanos, but is there an Indian at all of chametz? If you give a karban, there's no liquid with the barley?
Yes. The mincha, first of all, menachos were brought flour and oil together, flour and oil. And certainly karbanos were normally matzah. But for example, a korban toda, you had 30 loaves of matzah and 10 loaves of chametz. So we don't bring the korban toda on Pesach, certainly because it's made out, part of that korban is made out of chametz. But the other menachos were made matzah. So there's no problem with bringing them on Pesach. Okay. They fashioned it in a way so it would not become chametz. Okay. So that's just the remez of the Sa'orim is because the Chazal see a connection to the mitzvah Sa'omer in one of the schusim. So Vayiki Shmo Gidon et Mispar Chalom Vet Shivro Vayishtachu. So he heard the recitation of the dream and its interpretation, and Gidon bowed down. Vayoshev al Machane Yisrael. He goes back to his camp. Vayomer Kumu Ki Nasan Hashem B'Yadchem Es Machane Midyan. He was given a sign. This was a sign to Gidon that Hashem again is going to be delivered into our hands. Now comes generalship. Vayachatz es 300 ha'ish 3 rashim. He divides the 300 into 3 groups of 100. Vayten shofarot biyad kulam v'chadim rikim. He gives each man a shofar. He gives each man a jug, empty. But v'lapidim b'toch hakadim. He puts a torch into each jug, but the jug, remember, is sealed, so you can't see the fire. There's a concealed fire in the jug, and each man is holding a shofar and one of these jugs with a torch inside of it. By the way, Rashi, look at Rashi. Again, he notes the alliteration. There's a literary style that you see the words shofrot and lapidim, laskir zchut matan Torah, right? It says vayi kol hashofar v'tahar Hashem, and it also says klapidesh. So Rashi is saying that besides the schus of the oimer, it's also the schus of matan Torah. That's why they mention shofar and lapidim here. But he says pshutos was nighttime, so they needed lapidim because for light to see, so they wouldn't trip. So he gives a drasha pshat, and he gives a basic pshat. Then he says like this: Vayomer aleihem mimeni tiru v'chein tasu. You're going to follow me. You're going to watch my example. I, myself, am going to come to the border of the camp of Midian. Whatever you see me do, you do. V'takati b'shofar. First, I'm going to blow the shofar. Anochi b'chol asher iti, and you will follow. Utkatem b'shofarot. Gamatem. Svivot kol hamachane v'amartem l'Hashem u'legidon. And you shall cry out for Hashem and for Gidon. Now, by the way, there was apparently an ancient Israelite military tradition that the commander of the troops would not remain behind and send his men into battle. Rather, he would lead them into battle. We saw evidence of that in Yoshua. There's evidence of that by Pinchas in Midbar. Since Gidon was from humble origins, not from the upper class, it was especially clear to him that it was incumbent upon him to take action first. But I mention this because even in the Israeli army, in the 6-Day War, in the Yom Kippur War, there were inordinate amount of officers who were casualties because in the Israeli army, the officers don't stand back and give orders, but they go in front. And you can see this is a tradition that goes all the way back to Gidon, which is actually mentioned in the Tanakh. So now, by the way, the Meforshim also explained to us why three, because he's going to attack them from 3 sides, but he's going to leave one side open to allow them to flee. So he left the side towards the Jordan open to give them a chance to flee. So Vayavogi Gidon u'mea ish asher ito b'ktzei hamachaneh, Rosh ha'ashmarot hatichona, the night is divided into 3 watch periods. The guards of the middle watch had just been awoken to replace the first watch guarding the Midianite camp. The timing of the attack during the changing of the guards caused additional confusion, as the guards were not yet at their posts. Therefore, they were not in position to observe the source of the noise and the light. So they came at the change of the guard. They blew shofar. What they did is they broke open the jugs. So now all of a sudden, it was all this light. Each, the 3 companies sounded the shofars and they broke the jugs. They held the torches in their left hand, and in their right hand the shofars. They called out, sword for God and for Gidon. Each man in his place stood without entering the enemy camp. So the enemy thought each one of these was like its own 300 different legions. So vayaratz kol hamachane vayariu vayanisu. The Midianites screamed and fled because they weren't clear how many people were attacking them. Vayitku shlosh mot hashofrot vayasam Hashem et cherv ish b're'ev kol hamachane. The Midianites were using their swords to kill each other. Vayanas hamachane at Beit Hashita tzrei rasa. They ran to Beit Hashita, which is one of the mountains between Ein Charon and Beit Sha'an. Near Kibbutz Beit Hashita, there is such a place. At Tzfat Avel Mechola al Tabat. Avel Mechola is a city in the western portion of Menashe. And Tabat, says most scholars identify this with Ras Abu Tabat, near the Jordan River to the east. So they fled east towards the Jordan. The men of Israel who had mobilized, like we said, from Naphtali, Asher, and from Menashe, they were the ones, they ran after Midian. Umalachim shalach Gidon. Gidon sent messengers, b'chol har Ephraim lemor, to the people on Har Ephraim, Redu likrat Midian, go down, v'lichdu lebet hamayim, go prevent them from crossing the Jordan, ad Beit Barav et hayarden, v'yitza'ei kol ish Ephraim v'likdu et hamayim, ad Beit Barav et hayarden. So they're trying to prevent kill as many Midianites as they can. Vayel Kiddush Netzare Midian. They captured two princes, et Orev the et Ze'ev. Vayargu et Orev Bitsur Orev. They killed Orev in the rock of Orev. Ved Ze'ev Hargu B'Yekev Ze'ev. Each place was given the name as the place that these princes were killed. These were princes of Midian. Vayardiful Midian. And they chased after Midian. V'rosh Orev Ze'ev. They cut off the heads of Orev and Ze'ev. Eviol Gidon Me'ever Yarden. And they brought the heads to Ever Yarden. So after Gideon routed the main camp of Midian in the Israel Valley, and the Midianites fled across the Jordan River, he and his men continued to chase them, while others killed their military leaders. Gideon's aim was not to stop the Midianites' flight, but to inflict upon them as many casualties as possible. Therefore, he remained across the Jordan in the direction where the Midianites had fled, in a place where the battle might be re-engaged. The skulls of the princes who had been captured and killed by Israel were sent to him there. So, this is the battle of Gideon and the 300, using subterfuge and generalship, but of course, the Yad Hashem was certainly prevalent in having 300 cause 130,000 Midianites to flee in front of them. Any other questions, comments, Harot?